All right, good morning, everyone. Welcome to Tuesday in week 13, just a few days left in the term. Yukimi's feeling excited about that, or a little bit? Huh? You're what? You're going home? Cool. When do you fly out? On the 9th. Oh, okay. Yeah, that's exciting. What's that?
After the exam.
After the exam, yeah. That's good. That'll be nice to be home, hey? Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Sorry, I was just thinking of what to say next, and I couldn't think of it. But I'm glad you'll get to go home, Yukimi. That'll be nice. Miles is here. I'm going to say hello to people. Good morning, Miles. Good morning, Vicky. Good morning, Zion. Jack's here. Good morning, Jack. Anna's here. Good morning, Anna. Clara's here. Good morning. Daniel's here. Good morning, Daniel. Mike is here. Good morning, Mike. Gabrielle is here. Hi, Gabrielle. John is here. Good morning. And Shimimu is here. Good morning to you. Okay. So yesterday we were just wrapping up kind of religious oppression, and I threw this article at you that had to do with a number of complex issues, right? The issue of free speech, the issue of religious oppression, or at least respect for other religious traditions. We had a brutal murder thrown in there just for good measure. And, the question, of course, was, how do we resolve an issue like this, right? How do we figure out how to kind of live in a society where people have different values and beliefs and ideas about what kinds of things should or should not be said, or should not be shown, right? And so we said that the context of this question was that in France in 2015, these cartoons were printed in a magazine, in this Charlie Hebdo magazine, where the Prophet Muhammad was kind of portrayed in a very comic, silly kind of light. But again, Muslims in France and in other places were upset and offended by these cartoons. There were protests and violence and vandalism that kind of went along with the kind of outrage. Things kind of settled down a little bit in terms of the cartoons, but then about a month ago, a history teacher in a high school showed the cartoons in class as a way to start talking about free speech in society. And of course that outraged people again. That knowledge came to, I guess, be known by a young man who then murdered the teacher, which of course I, for obvious reasons, cannot approve of. You should never murder teachers. Just if there's one lesson that we take away from this, that it's for us, we're just trying to do our jobs here. Huh? I would never murder a student. I think you'll be happy to know. But yeah, don't murder teachers. We're usually nice people. At least I hope so. But even though the murder itself, I think we can pretty clearly say, murder is wrong, right? You shouldn't kill people. It's morally wrong. And again, in a society like France or Canada or the US, you may not murder anyone for just about any reason, right? Maybe self-defense or something like that. But for the most part, you're not allowed to murder anyone ever, no matter what your motive is. So the murder is wrong, but of course, that doesn't mean that what the history teacher did was necessarily correct. Or maybe it was, right? This is a complicated issue of what to do with material that some people find offensive, right? And so what are kind of the two positions here, the two sides of this controversy? What's one side? That the what? Not so much. I don't think there's a lot of people that believe that the murder was justified, but there are people who believe that showing the cartoons is is wrong, right? Showing the cartoons is upsetting to certain people. The cartoons don't need to be shown. I suspect they're probably not that funny anyway. Well, maybe they are, I don't know. And we should respect the kind of religious values of other people, right? We don't need to, we don't need to outrage and upset people. So why do it, right? But then there's the other side. What's the other side?
Like the other side supporting the teacher, like he's doing the right thing.
Right. Yeah, the other side supports the teacher and supports the idea of free speech, right? So just because person A might find something offensive, it doesn't mean that person B is not allowed to say it, right? Person B, the other side is saying that person B should be allowed to say pretty much whatever they want, and if person A doesn't like it, well, that's too bad, right? That's the price of living in a society that has freedom of speech. Sometimes you hear things that you don't like or don't agree with, but that's just how it is. So again, there's these two kind of sides, right? And which one is, how do we decide what to do here, right? How do we decide whether should free speech be the winner here? Should the outcome of this be that, well, we have freedom of speech in France, and sometimes if you live in a society like that, you're just going to hear things that you don't like and deal with it. That's just how it is, right? Or do we take the other side and say that, saying and showing images that upsets and outrages people is not a good thing, right? If you want social harmony, if you want people to feel a part of the country, you have to respect all kinds of people. And so some things maybe just should not be said, right? And of course that doesn't include hate speech. Hate speech is usually outlawed anyway. But maybe there's just some things we don't show or we don't say because they're offensive to people, right? And so you just shouldn't, don't upset people for no reason. But what do you think? What do you think? What do you think is kind of the right way to, not the right way, but what do you think is a useful way to think about this and to decide how this should be handled? Not the murder part, but the free speech versus religious freedom part. Okay, there should be a limit to what you say. Why is that?
Because even though you don't see it, whatever you say to the other person affects them in ways you do not know.
Right. So, well, yeah, sometimes things that you say can affect people in ways that you don't know or don't understand. However, in this case, we do know how it affects people because they very clearly told us, right? So Muslims in France and the world around have stood up and said, hey, we don't really like these cartoons. These are very offensive to our religious sensibilities. Please don't do this, right? And of course, some people have gone much farther and used violence to kind of drive their point home. But their effective point is that, yeah, these are offensive images. Please don't show them, right? But it's true, right? We have the ability to hurt people or to upset people with our words or our images, and so that's an important thing to consider. But is freedom of speech more important than that, or not?
Particularly in France, like freedom of speech is more important than the religion because it's latte.
Yeah.
I think the teacher gets to do what he wants.
Yeah. So the French government has a very strong, history, and they placed a lot of importance on secularism, right? That laïcité thing, right? And so the idea that religion has no place in the state. If you want to go practice your religion over here, that's okay, but our society runs in a non-religious way. And so, yeah, we shouldn't go to any lengths to do anything based on religion because religion is over there, right? Religion is over there, and the way the state functions is here, right? And there's no religion. Our state is watertight, right? There's no religion coming in influencing what we do, right? And that's kind of the position that the French government has taken, right?
I think, it's my opinion,
Yeah.
freedom is important, I agree, but to a certain limit, like, for example, if freedom was to be like everywhere, like, I mean, like, you're allowed everything, you're allowed to say anything, I could just say, basically, this is an example, I hate it, you know,
What?
obviously you'll feel bad, right?
Obviously, I would.
Yeah, so to a certain point,
And then you'd fail.
exactly,
No. I'm just kidding. But yeah, so again, words matter, right? Unfortunately, there's, I don't know if maybe this isn't a cultural universal, I'm sure, but here in the West, there's this saying that we often say to our young people, and we say, sticks and stones may break my bones, but names will never hurt me, or words will never hurt me, right? And it's kind of a cute thing, and it's like, sometimes kids will say mean things, but don't worry about it, little child, right? That's kind of what we say. But of course, it's not true, right? Words actually do hurt, right? And the things we say can hurt people. And so a society in which you can just say anything you want to is one in which, a lot of people are going to be offended or upset or hurt or outraged, right? And again, is that necessarily good for society or good for people or not?
and then in this case, the student, he or she would have thought like, oh look, they're making fun of me, they're making fun of my religion, they don't care about my religion, they don't respect it.
Sure. So the message in the classroom might very much be that, oh, well, apparently this is okay, right? Apparently this is, nobody cares about my religion, right? Now, here's a question for you. I think the article said, and I think this is true, that the teacher was showing a bunch of cartoons, and the Prophet Muhammad was in some of these cartoons, but God was in some of the cartoons, and Jesus was in some of the cartoons, and maybe Buddha, but I'm not sure, I forget. So is that different? Is a cartoon of Muhammad, Prophet Muhammad, and a cartoon of Jesus, are they the same thing?
Technically, yes.
Technically, yes. But are they the same thing? What's the big problem with a cartoon of Prophet Muhammad? What do Muslims kind of object to in that cartoon?
I don't know, what was in the cartoon?
Huh?
What was in the cartoon?
I don't. I never actually went to the trouble to search them out. But he's, as far as I know, and correct me if I'm wrong, but Muslims don't want the prophet to be shown in any. You're not allowed to depict him. You're not allowed to show him as a person. And I think historically, Islamic art has been organized such that you're not allowed to show any people, right? Because I think the idea is that the danger that they may be worshipped as gods, right? If you create an image, So Anna says here, he's like a second god for Muslims, and you don't want images of people created that then other people might kind of deify or look up to as God, kind of thing. And so,
Prophet Muhammad is messenger of God.
Yeah, he's the messenger, but he's not allowed to be depicted. And I think Allah is the same thing. You never see an image of Allah, right? He has no physical representation, right? But is that the same for Jesus? No. We see him represented all the time, right? We know when I put up the picture of him when we were talking about racism, we all pretty quickly, oh yeah, there he is, right? There's Jesus. So Christians have no kind of prohibition against showing Jesus or God, right? We see them depicted as humans all the time. But Muslims do have this rule where no, Allah and Muhammad are not depicted, right? They're not shown as people. That's not done, right? So they're not on, in principle, yeah, that's the same thing, right? You have a cartoon of Jesus and a cartoon of Prophet Muhammad. What's the difference? But it turns out, religiously speaking, there is a difference, because for the Christians, it's totally fine to show a picture of Jesus looking all heavenly and the light and all that, right? That's perfectly fine. But for Muslims, it's not fine to show Muhammad in any light, right? Whether it's humorous or whether it's, meant to be very flattering, doesn't matter. It's not allowed, right? So those two things are not the same. What else is not the same? Are Muslims a dominant or minoritized group in France? Definitely in a minoritized group, right? Christians, are they dominant or minoritized? Dominant group, yeah, even though, again, France is a secular state, but there is a long history of Catholicism in France, right? And so lots of French people remain Catholic. And so, again, we have a dominant minoritized group. And so who's dictating what's allowed to be done, right? And it seems like the dominant group is, right? The dominant group is saying, well, yeah, like what's the big deal about showing a religious figure? And the question is well, it's not a prohibition for you to show your religious figures, right? Christians can show pictures of Jesus all day long. And so to ask Muslims, well, why are you offended by this? Well, the minoritized group has a different view, right? It's just like the religious symbols law in Quebec, right? It's very easy for the dominant group to say, well, what's the big deal? Just don't wear any religious symbols. Whereas the dominant group doesn't usually wear them anyway, right? So it's not a big deal for them. It is a big deal for people who are members of a religion who do have religious symbols or are kind of required to wear them. And so, yeah, it's not the same thing, right? It's not the same thing because, again, you have one group who's kind of making the rules and has the power, and they're asking the small group, they're asking the minoritized group, well, what's the big deal, right? And again, there is a big deal. It's very easy to do things that you're allowed to do and then say, well, what's the big deal, right? And in fact, it might be a big deal.
I think like a teacher or a student, they were seeing it from their own shoes. They didn't see it from both perspectives.
Right. So, yeah, I think the teacher did make a step towards acknowledging other people's perspective because he did allow Muslim students to leave. But then, is that fair either? Because he's going to show images that are offensive to them. They're going to leave, and then they're going to miss out on the discussion that really they should be a part of.
And you're laughing behind my back.
Right. Yeah, and maybe they're in the library, maybe Muslim students are in the library and they think, oh, everyone's in class laughing at my religion, right? Or they're having a conversation about freedom of speech versus religious freedom, and I'm not a part of it, right? I'm leaving because the only way for me to be part of that conversation is for me to be offended by what's on screen, right? And so, again, the teacher kind of maybe thought he was doing something accommodating, which in some ways he was, but yeah, it creates a situation where, again, the minoritized group is excluded, right? They're excluded from the conversation, and the dominant group will decide what's right and wrong, right? Or what's allowable and what's not. And so whether showing those images was right or wrong, showing those images excluded the minoritized group from the conversation. And I think that's an issue, right? Whether or not you're respecting religions or not, showing the images had the effect of pushing people away. And those people should have been in the room, right? Because they have an important voice in this conversation. right? They have an important voice. Yeah, what else do you think? So do you think what the French government is doing is useful? Like what's the French government's response to this whole issue so far? What are they doing?
They're banning homeschooling.
Right, so no homeschooling. What else are they doing? Don't remember. Well, I think they're asking their teachers to, they're kind of pushing their teachers to promote, more secularism and to sort of put this teacher up as a hero, right? As a hero of, a French hero for standing up for freedom of speech and secularism and laicité, right? So, again, is that useful?
How was the teacher standing up for freedom of speech?
Well, this is the narrative, right? The story they're trying to create, or the story they're using, is that this guy was just trying to teach his students about freedom of speech and freedom of conscience, and he died for it, right? And so he's almost a martyr, if you will, right? He's a hero in that he died for free speech. And I'm not saying that that's necessarily true, and I'm not necessarily saying that that's the way to look at this, but I think that's how the government is trying to, this is the narrative they're trying to build, this is the story they're trying to build. And again, whether that's true or not is your choice to make. But that's what the government is trying to do with this. And again, is that useful? Or is that a good idea?
But to some extent, it's right. But
Mm-hmm.
but like if the government is looks at it from the view of what those people, the Muslims, are
Mhm.
seeing it, they'll actually see something different, because like 99% sure that the government is in the dominant group.
Yep.
So they don't, it's not affecting them, so they wouldn't know what the Muslims are going through, and then bringing this thing out that Hitler teacher was a hero will only ignite the Muslim community.
Mm-hmm. And let me ask you this, and hopefully I'm not guiding you too much in one direction, but let me ask you this. What do you think we should want in terms of an outcome for Muslims in France? What should we want for them in living in France and in French society? What would be a good outcome for this group of people? Just kind of overall in general.
But obviously it should be respected.
Yeah, if we want Muslims to live in our country, if we're France, and we want Muslims to live in our country and feel respected and thrive and be, part of the country, not necessarily to assimilate, but to kind of, live in harmony and cooperate and pay their taxes and follow the laws and all of these things that we want all citizens to do. Do these measures that the government is taking help or hurt that goal? Do they make Muslims feel more accepted? Does it reduce discrimination or prejudicial or racial, it's not race, but oppressive ideas about Muslims? Does it bring Muslims closer into France, or does it push them away from France?
They push them away.
Yeah. The whole thing pushes them away, right? And again, the classroom discussion was a perfect example of that, right? Where they were going to have a discussion on freedom of speech, and Muslim students were excluded, right? And probably not on purpose, right? I think that it's probably worth saying that I think the teacher here had really good intentions. I think he was really trying to be respectful and have a good conversation about this. But again, sometimes our intentions and what happens are not the same, right? Something we intend to be good is actually doesn't turn out that way. No, it doesn't go the way we want it to. And so I think he had good intentions, but he kind of accidentally or unintentionally wound up excluding Muslim students. And here, what we're seeing is that the government is acting in a way that also pushes Muslim perspectives out of the way, right? This guy's a hero. He stood up for free speech. You guys are all wrong. And again, the murderer was wrong. You should not murder people. But it transmits the message that we don't care about you Muslims. We don't care about your perspectives. We're going to assimilate you because you're not allowed to homeschool anymore. And this is the way it is. Tough, right? And that's kind of the message that French Muslims receive, right? For the dominant group, it's like, yes, standing up for France, standing up for secularism. This guy's a hero, right? And so again, it just pushes the two sides further apart, right? It doesn't bring them together. And again, what good will come of this, right? Like, what does this solve? Does this solve the issue we're having? And I would say probably not, right? It doesn't really make things better. Granted, the French government is in a difficult position when somebody is brutally murdered. Something has to be done, right? But again, something is being done, right? The guy has been caught. He will be tried. He will probably go to jail if he's guilty. The justice system will work as it normally does. But again, the question is, does this make things better for the minoritized group in France? Right? And yeah, probably doesn't, right? It just pushes them further out. And again, that's the problem, right? When people feel that they're not a meaningful part of society and that nobody cares about them and they're never going to get any respect or any opportunity or any of the things that they want, yeah, they're going to start to push back, right? They're going to start to behave badly. They're going to start to do things that you don't want them to do, right? Because they're excluded, right? The only solution is to find a way to get them a seat at the table. And again, I'm not saying that they need to assimilate. I'm not saying that they need to adopt a secular approach. I'm just saying that they need to be part of the conversation. Just like in the classroom, those kids needed to be in their seats, not in the library or somewhere else. I don't think that was helpful. And again, I think the teacher had the best intentions. Often teachers do, mostly teachers do, but sometimes you get it wrong, right? Sometimes you say the wrong thing. Sometimes you do something that you think is going to be helpful and it turns out not to be, and yeah.
You said that the teacher had warned the Muslim students.
I think so. I think he did.
But I thought the video included like Jesus and so like the video is actually really, really bad for the Muslims only.
I think so. And that's the thing, is that we're, in terms of Christianity, we don't have a strong prohibition against depicting Jesus, for instance. And so there's tons of pictures of Jesus out there. People who are very strongly Christians, they have pictures of Jesus in their home. There's depictions of Jesus on the cross, right? You've seen those on the crucifix? Yeah. And so not very flattering usually, but there he is, right? So Christians don't have any issue with showing Jesus in human form. And so, the step to kind of making a little bit, making fun of him a little bit, that's actually not that far. And Christians may be like, I don't like that, that's in bad taste, but it's not as strong as for Muslims, right? Because Muslims, you're not allowed to show these people at all, right? They may not be depicted. And so to depict them, even in a flattering way, is no good, right? But to put them in a cartoon and make fun of them in kind of a lewd way, super bad, right? For Christians, it's, either it's only a little bit bad or Christians are kind of okay with it. But for Muslims, it's much, much worse, right? So these things they're They're not the same, right? You're banning religious symbols in Quebec, but it doesn't affect everybody the same way. For Christians, it's not a thing. For Muslims or Sikhs, it's a thing, right? It's going to have an effect on their life. And so, sometimes things that appear to affect, on paper, they are supposed to affect people equally, but in reality, they don't. They affect certain people differently, disproportionately, if you will. Yeah, I think that's interesting. So if we were going to wrap this up, which we are, what should our final kind of statement on this issue be?
So first of all, they should not murder.
Right. The murder is definitely wrong, right? Unjustified in really any situation, right? If you're living in a, democratic society that is under the rule of law, murder is not okay, right? What else can we say about this?
I want to say this, but I don't really want to say it either. But like, I don't like it the way people are categorized, like dominant minority.
Yeah.
It's just so useless. What's the point of it? Isn't everyone literally equal?
This is a good question, actually, and it came up. It came up in another context at the college last week or the week before, and I won't explain how it came up. But yeah, the question was for online people, and it's a good question. The question is like, why do we keep categorizing people, right? Why are we always saying dominant and minoritized group, and isn't everybody equal? And the answer is yes, everybody is equal and should be equal, but society doesn't often function that way, right? Society doesn't treat everyone as equal, and people don't have equal amounts of power in society. That's the problem. And so categorizing people, even though we don't really want to do that, but it helps us to understand how society is operating, right? And who has the power, who has the ability to make decisions, who has the ability to define what is normal and what's not normal, right? Or how things work and how things don't work. That's why it's important. And so we don't want to create an understanding that some people are better than others. We don't want to create an understanding that some people are helpless and have no power of their own and can't do anything. But to some degree, those dynamics are happening and they are important to understand. And so, because again, if we look at this example in France, sort of white French people, culturally, ethnically French people, and Muslims who are primarily immigrants or recent immigrants or recent arrivals, they're not really on the same page, right? They're not really on the same level. In terms of people, yes, they're all humans. They all have human rights. They are equal of, they deserve equal respect, and nobody should see anyone as less than anyone else. But the way that the society operates, they're not on the same playing field, right? French Muslims have less power. They face more discrimination and prejudice. I suspect they probably have lower salaries. I suspect they are not represented in government very much. I don't know if there's any Muslim members of government. There may be, but probably not that many. And so they kind of don't have power. And so it's important for us to recognize that, because people without power require extra consideration and protection, right? The dominant group doesn't need any extra protection because they have enough power to protect themselves, right? They have the legal and the political power and the economic power to protect themselves. Minoritized groups need extra consideration because they often don't have those things. Does that help a little? I know what you're saying, and I know, in some ways it seems very reductive to simply categorize everyone and sort of, just worry excessively about the groups that they belong to. And again, this is something we said early on in this class that we had to do both of, right? So should we treat everyone as a unique individual that they are? Yes, absolutely we should. People are equal. People deserve our respect and compassion, regardless of whatever social group they belong to, right? Those things are true. But society doesn't treat everyone as equal, right? And again, we don't have to agree with that. We don't have to like that, but societies don't treat people as equal. And so the way for us to be aware of that inequality is to pay attention to social groups. And by paying attention to social groups, we can identify the inequalities, and then hopefully we can fix them. So that eventually, maybe we can get to a place where race or religious affiliation or gender just aren't that important, right? Or at least they don't determine the sort of experiences and opportunities that people have in society. That's the goal. But in order to get to the goal, right, in order to fix the problem, you have to be able to identify the problem. And paying attention to social groups helps us identify the problem. Does that help? Or am I missing what you're saying? Yeah, but you're just still like, I get it. I get it. And yeah, the answer I think is that we have to pay attention to both to some degree until we get to a point where we don't need to anymore. Yes.
How did we decide that, okay, Christians are the dominant group, men are the dominant group? How did we get to that decision?
It's not so much a decision as a observation of the way things are, right? So we're not simply, we're not sort of giving any status or power to one group. We're simply recognizing who has power. Okay, so it's not. We're not making a decision or giving anyone anything. We're just identifying who has power in this room. Me, right? But also you, right? You have some power as well. We have different kinds of power.
More power, you can fail us.
I can fail you with justification, right? I can't just fail you because I don't like you, which I do like you, but I can't just do that, right? So I do have power in this room. There are limits to my power, but in some ways I do have more power than you do, right? And so that's not really a decision that has to be made. That's a function of how the system works, right? I have some institutional power here, right? Now, it's not to say that you have no power, because if all of you got together and went to Sarah and said, this teacher is horrible and we're not doing anything and he's really mean, can you do something about that? Then I would have a problem, right? Sarah would come to me and say, what is going on? All of my students just came, or all of your students just came to me and said you were an awful person. So you have some power too, and you can use it. But in this room, I have institutional power, right? And for the most part, the college will back me up within reasonable limits, but the college will back me up. So I do have power in here, and nobody really decided that. There's historical precedent, right? Do teachers have power in classrooms pretty much around the world? Yeah. Have they had that power for decades and maybe even centuries before this? Yeah. There's a historical precedent for teachers having power. So I have power in this room, and there's historical reasons for that, and there are kind of political reasons and social reasons for that as well. There are limits to my power. There are things that I can do and things that I cannot do, but I still have that power, and nobody really decided that, right? Now, could we decide another way? Could we create a system in Columbia College where students have the power and I am a servant of you? We absolutely could. Would there be a lot of pushback from the dominant group? Yeah, teachers would be like, hold on. We can't have students just like running the show here. Like we need some sort of, because sometimes our interests are not entirely aligned, right? I want to give you work to do and you don't want any, right? So we're going to have to, we would have to kind of come to some sort of agreement. But again, nobody really decided that teachers have the power. They kind of just do, right? And so by identifying that, by saying who has the power, then we can work to change it if we want to. You know what I mean?
Okay, but like how like men and women, if you would see the majority, like women are way more than men.
Yeah. So, and we said that too, right? The idea that yes, there's more women than men, not by that many, but by a little bit. Yeah, you are the majority, but majorities don't so much matter as who has control of society, right? Who controls social messaging, who controls social institutions. And for the most part, those things are controlled by men. Women do participate, of course, but not quite enough for it to really matter, right? Remember when we talked about women in government and the UN said that you need about 30% of your government, at least 30% of your government to be women in order for them to have a meaningful voice. We don't have that here in Canada, and so women don't have a meaningful voice. If we think about it with regard to France, do you think 30% of the French government is Muslim? Highly doubtful, right? So do they have a meaningful voice in government? They do not. Do they require some extra consideration from the French government because of that? Yes, they do, right? They require extra protection. And so that's kind of what we were saying earlier is that, is what the French government is doing, how they're responding to this, is this useful, right? And I would say maybe not so much, because the Muslim community, even though this man was murdered, and whether or not the murderer was a member of the Muslim community or not is up for debate, but Muslims do require extra protection and consideration in French society because they don't have the majority, like they're a small minority, and they don't have any institutional or social power. And so the French government has to do a little bit of extra looking out for that group. But instead, they seem to be looking after the dominant group instead, the group that already has power. And so, again, I'm not trying to say a strong yes or no here, but I'm just trying to get you to consider what's happening. And is this useful or not? Is this helpful in terms of creating a society in France where everyone is kind of included and everyone is on the inside? Or does this create a situation where some people are on the outside, right? Some people are looking through the window at French society, maybe wishing they could come in, but, have been pushed out. Maybe.
So if all the men band together, they can become the dominant group easily.
Yeah. Yeah, they can, right? If, think about not the last US election, but the one before that, we had the opportunity to have a woman president, right? Hillary Clinton ran for president. If all women in the US stood up and said, you know what, forget about this Democrat-Republican thing, the real issue is men and women, and we want our girl in the office. Yeah, she would have won, right? But as it turns out in the US, party lines are a much stronger divide than gender or race or economic class or anything else. People are divided in a number of ways in the US, but their political affiliation seems to be the strongest one, right? But again, if all the women stood up and said, you know what, it is damn time we have a woman in the White House, she would have won easily. Maybe, yeah, easily, she would have won. Okay, do you want to take a little break? I think we've come to a good a good place to stop on this. Take a little break. When we come back, we'll just wrap this religious oppression up really quick, and then we'll go on to classism, okay? All right. Oops. Okay, sorry, and we're back, people. Actually, I'm going to switch to this. So I'm going to leave this. I think we've talked about this enough. I think we've highlighted the important points here in terms of understanding the issue. Maybe in your head you've come to a decision about, how to feel about this, or what side of the discussion that you fall on. And of course, you don't have to share it. It's okay. I think, to be honest, when we started talking about this, I wasn't really sure what to think of it either. But I think it's one of the nice things about talking is that you kind of work through it and you come to a clear understanding. So I think I kind of know where I sit on this issue in a way that I didn't know before we started talking. So I hope it was useful for you. It was useful for me. But would I like to share? Can you guess? Kind of. Where do you think I sit on this?
I don't think you sit on either side.
What's that?
I don't think you sit on either side.
It's true. It's true. I'm not firmly in one camp or the other. Okay, I'll tell you. So I think the murder was wrong. I think that the teacher was trying to do something useful and helpful and important. I think that the way that the teacher went about it probably didn't have a great outcome for his Muslim students. I don't think he meant for that to happen. I think it was unintentional and he had good intentions. Unfortunately, it didn't work out very well for him because he got murdered, which is wrong. But I think the French government's response is not going to be helpful in terms of bringing Muslims closer into kind of the center of French society. I think it will further push them away and alienate them. And I think that community needs more protection and more attention right now, rather than sanctions, which are basically what's happening, right? They're being told, no, you're wrong, this guy's a hero, no more homeschooling, everybody gets schooled by the state. I think it's a little heavy-handed, and I think it's not going to make any Muslims feel, it'll make them feel that they're less part of the French state. And I think they need to feel as if they're more part of the French state.
Do you think the teacher's approach to it was right or wrong?
Well, I think what he was trying to do, again, was partially, I think what he was trying to do was good. I think that the conversation should have been had, and it's basically the same conversation that we're having, right? But the images probably didn't need to be shown. And again, just because he wasn't offended doesn't mean that no one else was. And I think you could still have we had this conversation without looking at the images. And again, I think almost the worst part of this is that showing the images excluded people from the discussion that really should have been in the room, right? The Muslim students lost out because they weren't able to be part of that conversation, and they felt excluded, right? Because something that didn't need to be shown was, and that excluded them, right? And so I'm definitely in favor of freedom of speech, but there's also things that, not everything really has to be said, right? And some things simply should not be, right? And think about it when you interact with people in your life. Do you always tell them the truth? Do you always tell them exactly what you're thinking? No, right? Some things don't need to be said, right? Some things don't make the situation any better. And you may be thinking them, they may be absolutely true, but saying it just doesn't make the situation any better. And so sometimes it's better to keep it to yourself, right? And so again, maybe in a society where free speech is allowed, free speech should be allowed, but it doesn't mean that everything should be said, right? Some things are best kept to yourself, right? And so maybe this is an example of that. That's kind of where I sit at the moment. I reserve the right to change my mind, especially if some of the details that we've discussed turn out to be incorrect, or if I've remembered something incorrect, I reserve the right to change my mind. But that's kind of where I sit right now, is that there probably wasn't, at least in the classroom, there probably wasn't a need to show those, and it didn't have a very good, the effect was negative for the class and for Muslim students. For greater society, that's a more difficult question, and it's more difficult to control too, right? Because as a teacher, I can very clearly and easily control what comes up on the screen. In society, it's a little more difficult to control what comes up on, in society as a whole. But I think that's where I sit. Now, okay. So very, very quickly, we've talked about religious oppression here, where we have systems and laws and procedures and norms in society that can privilege one religious group over another, right? And we've talked about a few ways in which that can and has happened. The ban on religious symbols in the province of Quebec here, the Trinity Western University case versus the Law Society here in British Columbia, and here in France with the sort of publishing of these offensive cartoons, both in a magazine and being used in a classroom, right? Oops. Yeah, we've said that in Canada here, the Charter of Rights and Freedoms ensures that people may not be discriminated against based on their religion. But again, not all religions are kind of equally affected by things that happen in society, right? Some people can be disproportionately affected. And so because of that, they need extra protection. They need extra consideration, right? Especially when we're talking about minoritized groups, right? They need extra protections. Again, religious beliefs are protected in Canada, and so you may believe and worship as you so desire, but your behaviors are not necessarily protected. And so even if you don't believe, even if your religious values dictate one thing or the other, you may not behave in a way that discriminates against other people, right? So you have freedom of thought, freedom of belief, freedom of conscience, but your behaviors are subject to limits, right? And so Trinity Western University, which is run by Christians, these evangelical Christians may believe that homosexuality is wrong, or that homosexuality is a sin, or whatever they might feel. They're allowed to believe that, but they may not discriminate against people on that basis, right? That is not allowed. So they may have their beliefs, and they're allowed to have their beliefs. They're allowed to express them, but they are not allowed to discriminate, right? And so again, that's the limit of their religious freedom, right? We said that these rights and freedoms are subject to reasonable limits. That's the limit. You can believe what you want, you can feel how you want, but the limit is you may not act that way. You may not discriminate, okay? But in some cases, rights come into conflict, and we've seen that in basically all three cases where people's where religious freedoms have come in contact with freedoms of speech. And again, all of our rights are subject to limits, right? We can't exercise our rights in a way that takes away rights from other people, right? And sometimes those decisions are fairly easy to make, and sometimes they're very complicated. And so sometimes they'll make their way all the way to the Supreme Court of Canada, and the Supreme Court will have to make the final decision, right? But of course, as we mentioned, that decision is final. There's no appeals. There's no higher court, unless you want to count, the big guy upstairs. That's the final word. Yeah, and I think it's the final word on that unit too. Okay, classism. This is the last one. We won't have time to do a full, thorough investigation of what classism is, but we'll get a little bit of a taste for it maybe, okay? What's that? No. So let's define what class is. So class isn't, classiness, or what are you pointing at? What's that? Yeah, it's not this class. It's not being cool and classy. It has to do with social ranking, right? And so people in society are ranked in terms of their wealth or their status or their income or their political power or their kind of celebrity power. And so social class has to do with all of those things, okay? And so some of us have more opportunities and more status and more respect than others based on all of these things, right? Based on our money or our status or our kind of notoriety, whether people know us or not. And so I think this might be sociologist Max Weber who talks about this, but he talks about class and power, right? And I think I have a definition for power in my next slide. But what power is, according to Weber, I think, is the ability to get your way even when other people don't want it, okay? So power is the ability to get what you want even though other people might want different things, right? And so yeah, that's kind of the definition of power. So when we talked about me in this room, I have power because we are having a quiz tomorrow. And you may not want one, but we're going to have one anyway. So, that's an example of I can get what I want in the context of other people wanting something different, right? That's my power. I can have a quiz tomorrow. It will happen, and you may want it or you may not, but it doesn't matter. It's going to happen, right? So that's the definition of power, the ability to get the things that you want when other people might want something different. And Weber points out there are different types of power. And so, do you know who these three guys are?
I don't know the guy in the middle.
Don't know the guy in the middle? Who's the guy on the left?
Bill Gates.
Bill Gates, right? So founder of Microsoft, wildly rich guy. Although maybe I should have gone with Jeff Bezos from Amazon at this point, but here's Bill Gates. Who's the guy on the far right?
Justin Trudeau.
Justin Trudeau, right? You don't know Justin. You don't know what he looks like?
He's so handsome.
He's so handsome, right? Especially with his beard, which he copied from me, by the way. Justin, I want a shout out for that because I had mine first, and I know you're copying me. So just say what we're all thinking, Justin. So there's Justin Trudeau, right? And guy in the middle.
He looks familiar.
He what? He looks like Gandhi. Well, you're not too far off in that kind of idea, but yeah, he's the Dalai Lama, right? So he's the kind of leader of sort of the tradition of Buddhism worldwide. He's also a very important kind of political and spiritual leader for the country of Tibet, where he doesn't live anymore because he's pushed for Tibetan independence from China, and of course the Chinese would prefer Tibet to be more closely aligned with China, so he doesn't live in Tibet anymore. But he's kind of the leader of Buddhists worldwide. So here we have three very powerful men. Interestingly, they're all men. We have three very powerful men, but they're powerful in different ways, right? They have different kinds of power. So Bill Gates has financial power, right? He's super rich, right? He's got billions and billions of dollars. He's got a little bit of celebrity power too because he's, we know about him because he founded Microsoft, but his basic power comes from the fact that he's super wealthy, right? The Dalai Lama here, he actually does have a lot of money, to be honest, but he doesn't really use any of it, right? So his power doesn't come from money. His comes from social power, right? He has spiritual authority. When the Dalai Lama says something, people listen to him, right? And not just Buddhists, but other people around the world too. And so he has a lot of the things that he says carry a lot of force and a lot of weight, right? And they do because he has this kind of spiritual and social power. He's someone people respect, and so people listen to him. Huh? You want that power? You could ask the Dalai Lama how to get that power if you want. And then the last one, of course, is Justin Trudeau. And Justin Trudeau has political power, right? So he's the Prime Minister of Canada, of course. That office carries a lot of power in it. And so he can make things happen just because he's the Prime Minister of Canada. He has some social and financial power as well, though, because Justin comes from a fairly wealthy family. The Trudeau family has some money. He went to some fancy private schools, so he got a good education. He also has social power because he is the son of a former prime minister, right? Pierre Elliott Trudeau. And Pierre Trudeau was a generally well-liked prime minister. He did lots of things. And so Justin kind of, you know, he's a bit of a celebrity in Canada. People knew who he was before he was ever prime minister or anything. People knew who he was. So you can have power in society, and it can be different kinds of power. And you can have a different mix of power. So the Dalai Lama here doesn't have much in the way of financial power, but he has a lot of social power and some political power as well. Bill Gates has a lot of financial power, not so much political power, right? He doesn't hold any office, but he has money and he can make things happen. And he does. He actually gives a lot of money to charitable causes. And so he's actually very involved in kind of philanthropy and charitable enterprises these days. But yeah, but he has mostly financial power. So again, what we're saying here in classism is that this is the oppression of people who have less power and less resources by people who have more power and more resources. And again, it can be any type of power that you care to name, right? Some people who have more power will be in an oppressive relationship with people who have less. Now, like race, if you remember when we started talking about race, we said that race was socially constructed, right? There was no real biological basis to race. It was something that was created as a justification to allow some people to take control of other people, right? And it was the color of skin was kind of the primary way in which these races were differentiated, right? And social class is also something that is socially constructed, right? So social class only means something because we all believe that it does. So if you look back thousands of years into the human past and you look at a time before farming, we talked about that when we talked about sexism, you'll see that most hunter-gatherers are egalitarian. So people who don't farm and just hunt and fish, for the most part, they don't have status differences in their communities. Everyone is reasonably equal, okay? Some people get more respect than others, right? So if you are a good hunter or if you are a wise leader, people may give you a little more respect, but still there's no big status differences. Not like we have in modern society where someone like Bill Gates or Justin Trudeau or Rihanna, they have a lot of power, and someone like me doesn't have very much at all, right? Hunter-gatherers don't really have that. And again, hunter-gatherers often don't even have a concept of owning property. And so a lot of the ways that we differentiate people in modern society is by how much cash they have, right? The rich versus the poor. But of course, with hunter-gatherers, they don't really own anything, so they don't differentiate people that way at all. It really comes down to who you are as a person. Are you a good hunter? Are you a good leader? Are you a particularly understanding or compassionate person? Maybe you make people feel good all the time, and so people really like you because of that. It's much more about your personal characteristics in a hunter-gatherer context. In a complicated society like we live in, money and power serve to create status differences between people. But again, only because we agree that that's the case. Yeah, and so again, this starts out with agriculture, with farming. And so people who begin to farm the land and sort of claim ownership of the land can sell that land, or they can pass it on to their children, and their children can pass it on to their children's children. And this is a way to for some people to gain wealth, to grow wealth. And so often in farming societies, yes, you have a bunch of people farming, but sometimes you have people who are starting to get richer, right? They own more land. Maybe they can pay people to farm their land and they just keep all the cash. And so sometimes you get, kind of a farming level of society, and then you have nobles or aristocrats or dukes and duchesses and things like that. People who own a lot of land but don't work the land, right? The peasants work the land and then they give their harvest to the landowner who then gets to be rich, right? And again, that's something that comes out of agriculture as well. Hunter-gatherers don't do that because they don't own land and they don't really own anything. So nobody's rich, right? Everyone is equally rich or equally poor in a hunter-gatherer society, depending on how you look at it. But when you start to have agriculture, when you start to have farming, when you start to have people owning their land, you see that some people start to kind of put themselves above others, right? They can own land and they can kind of generate and accumulate wealth that way. When we move on to industrialization, so when some countries start to build factories and colonize the world and start to produce huge amounts of goods and sell them, we see that economic inequality increased, right? So hunter-gatherers are basically economically equal. Farming communities start to see some people rise above, and then industrialization further created more inequality, right? So some people start to own factories and businesses. They pay people to work in their factories, usually just by the hour. And then who keeps all the profits of the factory? The owner does, right? And this is what Karl Marx, who is kind of the founder of communism and socialism, as we talked about, this is what Karl Marx saw, and kind of this is what inspired him to create communism. He saw industrial capitalism. He saw a big inequality between these poor factory workers who were being paid as little as possible to work in the factories, and then these kind of fat cats who owned the factories and smoked their cigars and counted their money all day long, right? And so Karl Marx was around during that period of industrialization, and he said, this is exploitation, right? These people are working in the factories all day long, and the profits, the benefit of their labor, is going to the factory owner who sits on his butt all day and does nothing, right? This isn't fair. This is exploitation. And so Karl Marx dreamed up an idea where there would be equality. The proletariat, the factory workers, would overthrow the factory owners, the bourgeoisie, and they would take control of the factory for themselves and share the profits equally amongst everybody, right? That was kind of the seed idea for communism. And so that came out of a period of industrialization and a period where economic inequality was particularly high. Yeah, and so again, that was his idea for creating communism or socialism. And so there's a little bit of overlap from history here, as you're probably noting. But the other thing is that you will encounter Marx in all kinds of different courses. His way of looking at the world in terms of proletariat and bourgeoisie and exploited and exploiter, and kind of who has economic power, those ideas are used in all kinds of different fields. So psychology, anthropology, sociology, social justice, history, all kinds, economics, all kinds of things. You'll bump into Marx over and over again because his way of seeing things was kind of unique, and it's very useful for looking at society and how it works. It's not the only way of looking at things, but it's one way of looking at things. Right, so I've got a lot of slides on here, probably more than I need to. But again, the workers and the factory owners, the proletariat and the bourgeoisie are constantly locked in struggle, right? So the workers always want to work less and they want to have a more comfortable work environment, and they want to be paid more. The factory owners are always trying to pay them less and make them work harder, right? And so both sides need the other, right? Factory owners need somebody to work in their factories. Factory workers need a place to work so they can earn a paycheck. They both need each other, but they're constantly kind of pushing and pulling each other, right? The factory owners is trying to pay as little as possible. The factory workers are trying to get as much as possible, right? Okay, so social inequality in terms of economic or social class, these things are held in place by a series of kind of ideologies and beliefs. And so sometimes people are ranked according to economic status. Why do we give so much respect to people who are rich? Why do we think it's so cool? Ken, weren't you telling me last week, you were telling me about Elon Musk.
Yeah.
Now he's like the most
The richest
second richest person in the world or in the US?
in the world.
In the world, right. Why do we care about that?
Because he's rich.
Yeah, and you're kind of like, and I don't want to assume anything, but you're kind of smiling when you say that. But why are you not saying, ugh, this guy is the second richest person in the world? Isn't that disgusting? Isn't that gross? Isn't that horrible? Why are you not having that reaction? Why are you having the reaction that you're having?
Like he's successful. Like
Yeah. Yeah, so we give respect and status and prestige to people who are rich and successful, right? Or we use their richness as a measure of their success or of their worth. But why don't we think about it the other way around? Why do we not say, this guy has so much money, that's gross, that's horrible? Because there are societies where accumulating a lot of wealth is actually negative. Yes, so the First Nations people here who traditionally lived in this part of the world, their idea of status and prestige and respect is built on giving. And I think we talked about this already during potlatches. If you want to be an important, respected, high status man in First Nations society here in the West Coast, you get there by giving things away. The more you give, the more people give you respect and prestige. If you hoard all your stuff, if you're like, look how much stuff I have, people are just like, yeah, we don't have any time for you. You don't share. You're whatever. I'm not even looking at you. I have no time for you, right? So they have a totally different conception of what status and who should get status and power and respect. And in First Nations culture, it's by sharing, it's by giving away. But here in the West, we seem to give status and power and respect to people who have lots of money, right? And again, they may give away some of their money too, right? Bill Gates gives away a lot of his money, but that's not really why we're giving them respect. We're giving them respect because they have the cash, not because they're giving it away. But not every society sees it that way. Classism is held in place by ideas of breeding, right? So why did we make Justin Trudeau Prime Minister of Canada, right? Did the fact that his father was Prime Minister have anything to do with it?
yeah.
I think it probably did, right? Does that mean that he's the best? No, he may not be the best, but he's got name recognition, right? There's the idea that if Pierre Trudeau was a good Prime Minister, well, Justin must be as well, and that may or may not be true, right? But we have an idea that if you come from a certain family, you're up here, right? The Americans have the Kennedys, right? The Kennedys are kind of, if you're a Kennedy in the States, that's like royalty almost, right? So John F. Kennedy's family, who we talked about in history, his family is like very wealthy and powerful and like respected in the US. And so, yeah, if you're a Kennedy, people are like, ooh, they're a Kennedy. Let's see. Sometimes we give status based on occupations as well, right? So certain jobs have higher status, certain ones have lower ones, right? If you're a garbage man, right? If you pick up the garbage, that's a pretty low status job, right? And I'm not saying it's not important because, again, if they didn't pick up your garbage, people would be pretty unhappy pretty quickly. But again, that's a kind of a low status job, right? If you're a heart surgeon, high status job, right? Yeah, what do you think? Where's teacher? High, low, middle?
In the middle and the high.
It's at the top. It really depends on who you talk to. And there's cultural differences as well, right? So some cultures have a very high level of respect for teachers, some quite low, right? But you're probably right. It's probably somewhere in the middle, depending on who you talk to. Upper middle. Are you just buttering me up now? No. Oh, it's so high. Yeah. Yeah. What's that? Yeah, we do. Yeah, so sometimes your level of education can give you status too. Like if you have a PhD, sometimes that can be, people are like, oh, they Dr. So-and-so, ooh, right? So some of these ideas is that people in a higher class are more intelligent or just in some way better than regular people, right? And so, but again, the upper class, the people who are on the top of society, they get to determine what is desirable and cool and fashionable and, you know, worthy of respect, right? So if we look at, say, these things, all of these things are cool, right? And they're cool because in part they're associated with the upper class. So big fancy houses, that's a classy house, is it not? Here's Leonardo Dicaprio, right, in The Great Gatsby, but what's he doing? Well, he's wearing a tuxedo. Tuxedos are very classy, right? Which, of course, if you're going to own a tuxedo, you've got to have money because tuxes are not cheap, and places where you would wear a tuxedo are not cheap either. Here he is drinking a martini, which is also a very classy upper class drink, right?
At his own party.
At his own party,
Yeah.
which he can afford to throw because he's got tons of money. We've got, I think, it's a Jag, right? Yeah, we've got a Jaguar here, classy car, very expensive, probably $100,000 or so. Here we've got another rich-looking guy, right? He's probably drinking some whiskey or some brandy. He's got a cigar, nice classy suit, sitting in a nice soft leather chair, bow tie. Here's a guy golfing, right? All of these things are cool because, well, golfing was, it's a little less cool now, but it used to be something that really only rich people could do.
But now everyone can play.
Now everyone can play, but you know, decades ago it was really a sport for the rich. You had to have money in order to golf.
Yeah, right now like it's still expensive, but everyone can play.
Still expensive, yes, but today more accessible to regular people. But why do regular people want to do it? Because rich people made it fashionable, right? Why do poor people want to drive Jaguars and wear tuxedos and drink martinis? Well, because rich people made it desirable, right? It's just like the cigarettes, right? They're the high status group, and so if you're in the low status group, if you're not a rich person, you can gain status by borrowing some of these things, right? Just like a woman smoking like cigarettes that are usually for men, she kind of gains some status and power from it. And so poor people can gain status and power by trying to emulate or imitate the rich people, right? Whereas rich people will not usually try to emulate things that belong to lower economic classes, right? So all of these things are kind of things that are associated with lower economic levels of society, right? So here you have things like reality shows. This was a few years old. This is the Jersey Shore guys, kind of a reality show, but kind of very, what's the word I'm looking for? Pretty trashy. It was a pretty trashy show.
It's fun.
it's fun, but rich people aren't looking to emulate that, right? Keeping Up with the Kardashians is not quite the same type of show as Jersey Shore, right? And the Kardashians, of course, are another example of a high status family that people might want to copy or emulate, right? Here we have some alcohol that is very cheap and very like low economic class. You won't find any rich people drinking this kind of stuff, but poor people may. Here we have a car that is
Nice car, by the way.
seen better days, right? It's got cardboard taped to it. Not cool. Wrestling, right? WWE wrestling. Usually something that is popular among lower economic classes. Yeah, rich people are not that much into it.
Like Donald Trump is like in WWE.
He was, right? But again, we'll talk about Trump a little bit later, maybe. And then country music. Country music is another thing that is generally something that belongs to the lower economic classes, not.
No, not really. It's like the music taste
Well, now.
There's some generalizations here for sure, but again, what makes these things kind of low status, low class, and what makes these things high status, high class, really has everything to do with money, right? And so these things can all be enjoyed with less money, right? Country music or wrestling or taping cardboard to your crappy car or cheap booze or reality shows. Those can all be enjoyed with very little money, right? But these things you need money to enjoy them, right? Mansions, tuxedos, classy liquor, fast sports cars, cigars, in the past, golf. Those things all required money to be able to do, right? These things don't require money to do. And so again, the wealthier, because we give respect and prestige to the wealthier members of society, the things that are associated with the wealthy and the high status become cool. Anything that the Kardashians do becomes cool because they are cool, because they have wealth and status and privilege, right? And again, that's their whole brand, right? The only reason they make money is because people see them as wealthy and wealthy celebrities. If suddenly we found out that they were poor, people wouldn't pay attention to them anymore, because that's part of their celebrity, is that they're super wealthy, right? Okay, that's all the time we have. Sorry about that. Come back tomorrow and we'll keep talking about this. I have some things to show you, a video to show you. Oh, but tomorrow we have the quiz, so we'll pick this up on Thursday. But tomorrow's the quiz. Same thing as normal. I'll do the video. I'll do the Teams chat with people who are just online. But if you are normally in class, I expect you in class tomorrow to physically write your quiz, okay? So that's it. Good luck tomorrow. I'll see you then. Goodbye.